Hey Artu, I've read that you're in the next movie, The Empire Strikes Back, coming this summer. It looks awesome. Congrats, dude. Hey, I was just reading at a French magazine VSD from 40 years ago about The Empire Strikes Back. So here's a toast to the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors. Cheers.
This is Jason with the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors, and I just wanted to say that I am bummed that we're not doing this in person. It sucks that we have to do it virtually, but hey, we're making lemonade out of lemons and we're doing our best with this, so it should be fun. So cheers to the Alliance, cheers to collectors everywhere, and may the Force be with you.
Hey Georgia Alliance, this is Vicki Bitter in Northern Kentucky, sending a virtual toast for your virtual social. Thanks for extending your membership beyond the borders of Georgia. I've learned a lot, and I'm so happy to be a part of the group. Looking forward to the day when we can get together in person again. Until then, have a great virtual social.
Hey guys, it's Pete coming to you live from Minnesota. Hope everybody's doing well down there. Just want to send out a toast and thank you to everybody down there that's putting together this event and partaking in it. It's great that we're getting to do this when we can't see each other in person. So thanks again to Narayan and Justin for putting this together. Hats off, guys. Have a wonderful weekend and stay safe.
Hey, Sean Moynihan here in New York. Summer's here, and that can mean only three things: swimsuits, cold beer, and the Georgia Alliance Canteen to Cookout Virtual Social. Hope you're all doing well, staying healthy, and keeping cool. What's the matter, girl? You smell something? Hope to see you soon, and may the Force be with you. Cheers.
Oh, hey. I'm just over here grilling up some engineering and empire for this weekend's panel. From the Texas Club to the Georgia Club, cheers, and thanks so much for putting it on.
Hey everyone, just wanted to say cheers to the Georgia Alliance. Hope everyone's having fun this weekend and staying safe. Cheers.
Mike DeStefano here, Georgia Alliance. I salute you in your summer social. I hope you have a good time on the virtual, and I applaud you for all the good work you do within the community. Here's to you. Thank you.
What's up, GA Club? We're all hanging out and having a good time.
This is for the Georgia Club.
What's up, dudes?
Do those guys qualify as a club?
Ryan,
it's
Justin,
a pretty solid club from
what's
what
going
I understand.
on? Pretty solid club.
Virtual social. Sorry we're not there.
Yeah, guys.
But virtually, we're there in spirit. We're there in spirit. That's what matters.
For the most part, anyway.
So we get 15 seconds per 1, 2, 3, 4.
We're just gonna keep going on and on. So is this a podcast? Are we doing a podcast
This is
right
a
now?
podcast.
This is a podcast. This is like peg warmers.
I don't
Peg
have any
warmers.
material prepared.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to prepare a statement.
All right. Cheers, guys.
L'chaim, best to you all. Stay safe. Be good.
On behalf of the Georgia Alliance, it's my pleasure to welcome Matt George, Gary Borbidge, and Stephen Ward, the creators and authors of Engineering and Empire.
Thank you guys so much for having us. We're honored to be here. We've got the whole team in tow. We have a special guest star that we'd like to announce. Craig Stokely is going to be joining us a little bit later. He's going to provide some wonderful anecdotes that are available in the book to give you guys a better idea of kind of what to expect from the book for those of you that haven't read it. To give you guys a little bit of a background on the book, we've got Stephen here, who was the first person to kind of come up with this idea. So I want to hand it off to Stephen, and he'll start us off.
Hey guys, thanks for everybody tuning in, checking everything out. I mean, the book started a number of years ago, really with just a story that came from a friend who knew somebody who knew somebody else who knew somebody else who worked for Kenner. That ended up going down a whole rabbit hole of research that culminated in us getting together and actually doing a book out of our interest in how the entire Star Wars line came together beyond just the toys. More focused on how the actual people themselves were doing the things that they were doing and the lives that they lived before, during, and after that period.
And so a lot of people have asked, like, why we have what we have on our cover. Can you explain maybe a little bit the background of why we chose that for the cover?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Kroger, the grocery chain, is headquartered in Cincinnati, and the actual Kroger building itself, where their headquarters resides, during a certain period of time, especially during the creation of the Star Wars line, Kenner happened to rent a number of floors in the Kroger building, including the basement, a number of floors up top. So when we were coming up with the idea of what we wanted for the cover, we kind of we kind of knew it had to be something that was very specifically Cincinnati, because the whole flavor of Cincinnati really impacted the line in general, because it was just kind of such an integral part of how everything came together, the talent that happened to be there. So it seemed fitting to put the Kroger building on the cover, and we wanted to depict folks, kind of with kind of a contemporary to that period, clothing, walking into that building to go create these things. And then if you are looking up, you see the TIE fighters and X-wings, having their dogfight up in the sky above.
Very cool. Yeah. Had a lot of surprising amount of people not understand that Kroger has like nothing to do with Kenner, but Kenner has a lot to do with Kroger, and people, I don't
Right.
think everyone understands that. Yeah, Kroger didn't make Star Wars toys, but um, what walk through kind of the beginning, like the first time we went to Cincinnati. Explain kind of maybe that first meeting, because it was really influential in getting this project kind of off to a really good start. You maybe walk us through that first meeting?
Yeah. You were there, so you remember this one as well as I do. But first
You're a storyteller
meeting,
than I
first time
am,
ever
so
going to. What's that?
said you're a much better storyteller than I am. So you go ahead and tell us about Bob.
So first time we went to Cincinnati, we met a gentleman named Bob Moore. Went and sat down in a restaurant with him. He was a staff sculptor at Kenner. Eventually, one of the co-directors of the sculpting department. Mid 80s or so. But Bob was there before that, and Bob hung on to a lot of things that were getting thrown out back in the late 80s, when Kenner was clearing out a lot of things from the 12th Street storage warehouse. So we went and sat down with Bob, and Bob brought along a binder in I think it was like a, you might remember, I don't know if you remember, but it was in like a JC Penney bag. I guess keep it dry or something like that. I don't even remember if it was raining that day.
It was
But
like
he pulls
a
out this.
plastic grocery bag.
Yeah, it was like a plastic grocery bag, and he pulls out this thick binder. We open it up,
Was it a
and
Kroger bag?
inside, it was not a Kroger bag.
Okay.
That was a missed opportunity on Bob's part. Um, but he pulls this binder out, and inside are a lot of documents, really, really early documents that were from the very beginning of the line, in the spring of '77, explaining how a lot of the figures were going to be sculpted. There were blueprints, invoices. It was just a massive collection of 2D stuff that had been spared the fate of a dumpster somewhere. And Matt and I were just over the moon to look at this stuff, because it was so early. It was such early documentation for the line, explaining scale, which sculptors are going to be doing things, schedules. I mean, it was an absolute roadmap on the creation of the first 12 action figures. And that was, frankly,
Yeah,
that was a hell of a way
absolutely.
to start out the first
I
trip.
think that absolutely, and if that first meeting might have been just some low level person that might not have had brought anything for show and tell, it could have put the book on a completely different trajectory. So if you're like a believer in fate, I like to think that that first meeting kind of happened for a reason. And I mean, it's really cool to be able to see this original sculpting documents for the first, 8 of the first 12 figures, and to see
Yeah.
May 31st, 1977, and just, it was that early in the timeline. That really got us jazzed for reaching out to more and more folks as we kind of got further and further into the book and its development.
Yeah.
That first, we met 4 or 5 folks that first trip up there, and then kind of Gary came on a little bit soon after, and he interviewed a bunch of different folks. Gary, is there a particular story or two that kind of sticks out in your mind as being your favorite?
First, hi everybody, and thanks for being here. This is a pretty cool event you guys are doing, and we're happy to be part of it. When I knew we were going to talk about different stories and things that went into the making of this book, and thinking back on it, I mean, I actually had to pull a copy out and flip back through it. It feels like it was so long ago, given current events and what's been going on in the world. It feels like years ago when we finally went to print on this, but it really wasn't. It was last year or so. But there's so many great stories, so many great times, so many great people that we talked to, that we got a chance to interview and include in our first book. I think, obviously we did a lot over the phones back then too, but I think my favorite times were when we traveled. We usually all traveled together, either to Cincinnati or the Midwest, or it's one of the funny things about Kenner people. They seem to pop up everywhere. They're kind of spread all across the country now. And I think traveling to go and meet all these people and see them in person was probably the best part of the project for me. Hanging out with you guys, doing the project, actually sitting face to face with these people was pretty incredible. Particular stories, I think Rick Hughes was a great one. We had been trying to get a hold of Rick for months, and with no luck. And I remember pretty vividly driving home from work, and about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I had his phone number saved in my phone, as Rick Hughes. And for those of you who hadn't taken a look at the book or don't know who Rick Hughes is, Rick was a sculptor. I was an in-house sculptor very early on. He was there prior to Kenner Star Wars line, and was only there for a short time in-house during the Star Wars years. So anyway, I'm driving home from work, and my phone rings, and I look down and I see the name Rick Hughes come across the front of my screen, and I panic because I'm on the highway. So I had a quick pull off the road into a convenience store parking lot, and where I sat for about an hour and a half talking to Rick Hughes on the phone and scribbling notes onto napkins and any other scraps of paper that I could find in my car at the time, because I obviously wasn't prepared to do a formal interview with him. And then a few months later, all three of us are on a plane, and we're out in the Midwest, sitting in his living room and hearing some pretty incredible stories, including how he sculpted Boba Fett, and how he sculpted Chewbacca, how he sculpted Obi-Wan Kenobi. Some pretty incredible stories. Even after Kenner, he did some toy work for other companies that were pretty impressive and pretty iconic. Remco Monsters, Thundercats, list goes on. But Rick was a great one, and I think all three of us consider Rick a friend to this day. Actually, we consider a lot of these folks that are in our first book friends. A lot of them we can call up whenever we feel like it and just chat about nothing related to a book or Star Wars or Kenner or anything. But there's quite a few that we can do that with. Craig, who you're going to hear from later, I think he sends Matt and I an email at least once a week about something Star Wars or something, just to keep it fresh and say hi, and I'm thinking about you guys, and which is awesome. We have that. That's a common story or a common theme that has happened to us throughout this project. There's some great, incredible, talented people that we can now consider our actual friends, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, the cool thing about Rick was there weren't a whole lot of in-house sculptors back then, and the stories that he told from inside were from a completely different point of view than a lot of folks from back then. He told us, like, he had this Darth Vader head, and we're like, what the heck is this? It's like a big piece of resin. And he's like, oh yeah, they came to me and said they had this idea for a 12-inch line, and they needed a head real quick for Darth Vader to present to the marketing team. And they were going to pitch that idea for the 12-inch line, and he still had that head. So that was pretty cool, and just to be able to hear stories like that from the inside that we really I had not heard that story before, and a lot of the stories that he told us that are in the book, I don't think too many folks have heard before, because Rick was kind of hard to get a hold of, and I don't know how many folks have spoken to Rick about his time at Kenner, and that's kind of a constant theme throughout the book is people using this as a chance to tell their stories for the first time. And there's a lot of different anecdotes throughout the book like that. One of my favorite stories is kind of the urban legend that you've seen play out on the Toys That Made Us and maybe some other news articles, was that Bernie was the person who put his fingers out that far apart and said 3 3/4 inch. And one of the ladies that we interviewed for the book was Dave Okada's assistant, and Dave Okada was Jim's boss, and she was in all the key meetings, and she was taking the notes and taking the minutes as all this was kind of unfolding. And she spun down that Jim was the person that was really pushing for that 3 3/4 inch line. He fashioned the Fisher Price Adventure people into the original Star Wars prototypes, and they were kind of at that scale. And those stories, it's cool to hear someone else tell kind of their recollections of what happened back then. And as we kind of talk to different, more and more folks, we kind of got the understanding that this was going to be far bigger than one book could be. And we kind of drew a line in the sand and said, 400 pages, 70 different folks are in volume 1. And we're fortunate enough to have a lot of different folks interviewed for volume 2 already that we couldn't fit into volume 1. So the good news is we didn't put all the great people in volume. There's still going to be a lot of really good material for volume 2, but Jim was kind of one of those people that we had to get into volume 1, because his story, without his story, Star Wars wouldn't be what it is. Kenner wouldn't have got the license. And another person that is, in my opinion, as important to the history of Star Wars at Kenner is Craig Stokely. I think him and Jim, in my opinion, are the two most key figures to kind of line into the Kenner family. And we are fortunate enough to have Craig here to share some of his stories that he shared with us, with the rest of you guys. And we've got some time at the end carved out for some questions that Craig will help answer. So I'd like to turn everything over to Craig now. And Craig, have at it.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to be with you all today. To be able to share my toy story and a little bit about how the Star Wars toy line happened in a land not that far away, in a time not that far ago. And I want to thank Matt, Gary, and Stephen for their hard work in producing this book so that this entire story can be shared with the world. I guess it starts back in 1974 when I was the product manager at Kenner in the marketing department. And part of how we evaluated toys back in those days was we'd go out and play test the prototypes with kids. And Kenner had a relationship with the Mount Airy School in Cincinnati, Ohio, to go out and do this with the children in the school. And we had a robot prototype that had come in. And I was the product manager for the prototype. So I took the prototype out to the Mount Airy School and stood behind a one-way mirror and watched two young boys play with this robot prototype. And they weren't very excited about it, which didn't make me very happy, but they weren't very excited about it until one of the kids grabbed the toy and he said, "I'm the $6 million man." And he started jumping the toy around. And I didn't know what the $6 million man was. I was perplexed, and I asked the lady that did the play testing, Dolores, who the $6 million man was. She didn't know who he was either. So I drove back to headquarters and went into Hugh Kaiser's office, who was the VP of advertising. And I asked Hugh who $6 million man was, and he didn't know either, but he said he'd find out. So a little bit later that day, he told me this was a TV show that had just come out on ABC, and the ratings were tremendous. This was a primetime TV show, which was very unusual for anything that appealed to kids back in those days. The ratings were great, and I presented the concept to our product development meeting, which Bernie and Dave were both in. And Bernie was ready to go for it right away. So we called Universal Studios, who owned the rights to make the show. And they had not been approached by anybody to license this show. So Bernie and I flew out to California to talk to the people at Universal. And we made a deal first for the $6 Million Man and all sequels and all spinoffs. So we came back. Dave and his team got to work really hard on designing the $6 Million Man. Many of you probably are familiar with this toy. It had to be pretty large because it needed to incorporate a lot of features, like the fish lens bionic eye and the roll-up skin sleeve where you could replace the component in the arm, and an ability to lift up an engine with his right arm. So we took that prototype with a metal armature out to California to meet with Universal and Lee Majors, who was the star, to get their approval. And I still remember the story going through the checkout or in the airport. The gal looking in there, she was screaming because there was a little man in the box in my suitcase going through the screening, and it was the metal figure for $6 Million Man, which she thought was pretty neat. Anyway, we got the approval for $6 Million Man. Dave and his team in manufacturing worked really hard to bring it out. We brought Lee Majors and his wife Farrah Fawcett at the time to Toy Fair in 1975 to introduce the line. It was the top toy of the year in '75 and for several subsequent years. And it was a lot of fun, and it taught us all at Kenner about the action figure market, which we didn't know anything about at the time. We had a lot of other great products, but not in action figures. So $6 Million Man had a great run for several years. Bionic Woman became a spinoff. We got a lot of great stories about how that happened. She died, and then she was brought back to life after she died because the fans of the show were furious. But we were needing another license because, as you know, any license except for Star Wars eventually runs out of gas. And it was beginning to do that about 1976, 1977. So part of my job by then as VP of marketing with the product management team working for me was to find new licenses to bring into the company. And we found a lot of them. We found several really good ones. One, you may remember a pilot called The Invisible Man with David McCullum that was on for a few episodes, and then it went off the air, which is a risk in this business. Dave and his team did a terrific job of developing a toy line for The Invisible Man, which isn't easy, but they did a great job. And then we had another option to do the toys for Man from Atlantis, which was Patrick Duffy's show before he got on Dallas. So we had him in to meet him and did a great toy line on Man from Atlantis. It went off the air in a few episodes. But that was the game we were playing, and thanks to Bernie, who was a riverboat gambler, that was part of the game in the toy business. You've got to bet smartly a lot, and you figure you're going to lose a lot. But when you hit it, it's going to be really good. Like $6 Million Man doubled Kenner's toy business in the first year. This was back in '75. We went from $50 million to $100 million just on that toy line with really good margins. So that was the game we were playing, and we were looking for the next license to sustain the company because most of the toys' life cycles are about a couple of years. If they're licensed products, they can have longer life cycles because of the licenses, but most toys don't last that long. So you've got to constantly replenish the base business in addition to growing. So I'm at Toy Fair in 1977 in New York in the toy building, and part of my job as the marketing VP is to meet with all these toy inventors who are independent inventors that come in with concepts that they think we should make. Most of them aren't very good, but part of my job was to meet with all of them, from early in the morning until late at night to evaluate their ideas, and if they had any potential, bring them back to Cincinnati and put them in play tests. So I got a call from, and a lot of people would come in. We had Mark Spitz come in, who was the Olympic swimmer. You know, he was trying to sell me a line of ping pong, volleyball accessories. I mean, it's really weird stuff, but you got to meet a lot of fun people in this job. I got a call from a guy named Charlie Lippincott, who I'd never heard of. And he said he had a movie that I had to see. I had to see this preview for this movie because he was representing a new movie that had tremendous licensing potential. I was really inclined not to go to see this because any of you know that most movies that come out only last a short period of time, a few weeks, maybe a few months, and then they're gone. And it takes a year for it to come up with a toy line to do the sculpting, the molding, the manufacturing in the Orient, get it over here. So it takes a good 12 months generally to develop and introduce a toy line, and movies are gone by then and usually forgotten. And there really had not been a very successful movie license done in the toy business at that time. Of course, there hadn't been a primetime toy license done before $6 Million Man either. That was part of the fun of this opportunity. So anyway, to make a long story short, I was really tired that day after days meeting with these inventors. It was a rainy day, just like it was in Cincinnati. That should have told me something when I went out to Mount Airy School to see the play test with the kids. It was a rainy day. It was rush hour in New York. If you've been in New York at rush hour, it's really bad with rain. I had to go across town to meet this guy I'd never heard of for a movie I've never heard of. But I went because that was my job, and you just never know. You just never know when you're going to hit pay dirt. So I walk in to the room, and a fellow named Charlie Lippincott there. Unfortunately, Charlie's just passed away earlier this year. Charlie was the promotional guy for the Star Wars movie, and part of his job was to try to get this thing licensed before it was going to come out later that year. And that was the other part. The movie's coming out in May of '77. I'm meeting with him in February. It takes a year to come up with a movie with the toys. Who in their right mind would even take the cab across town in New York to meet with this guy? It's crazy, but there I was. Anyway, he shows me the trailer for the Star Wars movie, which is what you've all seen, the original Star Wars movie. And boy, what a terrific toy line right there. It wasn't clear what the storyline was, but the characters, the unusual characters, the vehicles, which we've learned from $6 Million Man, all the accessories were really wonderful. And the line was fully developed. I mean, we'd have dozens of characters. He also showed me some drawings from Ralph McQuarrie, who was the concept artist that George Lucas used to do the filming. And mind you, at this time, Lucas was still shooting this film. This was February of '77. The film hadn't been finished. So I asked Charlie, I said, this really looks good, but how can we make a deal for a movie, let alone one we don't understand the storyline from? How about a script? He said, I can't do that. It's secret. I said, how about showing me more than the trailer? Maybe a rough cut of the movie so we get some idea of the storyline. He said, I can't do that. It's secret. So I said, okay, give me the trailer and give me the illustrations from McQuarrie, and I'll go back to Cincinnati. I want to show them to Dave. Dave Okada's was my partner in crime in all the new products that we looked at. Dave's a terrific guy. Has a great sense of toys and great history of the toy industry. So I want to go back and show it to Dave, and if he liked it, show it to Bernie and the product development committee and see what they thought. So that's what we did. I went back to New York went back to Cincinnati with the trailer. We showed the trailer. It looked really interesting. Again, this is March. High risk. The movie's coming out in May. And there was really some skepticism on whether we should do this or not. Because if the movie's so-so, if the movie's a bust, it's going to have to be unbelievable to make this a good toy movie because we can't introduce the toys and ship them until 1978. So about that time, Bernie and I had probably the only copy of Hollywood Reporter, the only subscription to Hollywood Reporter magazine in Cincinnati, I'm going to guess. And I read that every week to keep current on what the new properties were that were coming out, the new movies and new TV shows. And I saw that there was a new movie coming out from Steven Spielberg. Well, at that time, George Lucas had only done American Graffiti. That was his only movie, so he didn't have a big track record. And Spielberg had done Jaws, which was big, but he didn't have a really big track record. But he was coming out with a new space-oriented movie, this said, not to be specific. So we decided, let's go out and talk to both of these guys in California, and we'll make a decision which one we're going to roll the dice on, because either one was going to be a dice roll. We didn't have a good TV show that we were going to be able to license after $6 Million Man at this point. Our two bets, as I mentioned earlier, had gone away. So Bernie and I flew out to California to meet with Spielberg and Lucas on 2 days. And we met, I'll never forget it, we went to Columbia Studios to meet Steven Spielberg, who's, Spielberg and Lucas are both about my age, so we're all kids at the time. And he comes in and he's very apologetic. He can't really tell us anything about the movie. He can't tell us the storyline. He can't show us anything. And the guy from Columbia, who was the licensing guy, wasn't very happy about that. But Bernie and I were trying to pump him for what we were trying to do with the toys. And he came out voluntarily and said, he said, you should do George's movie. It's so much better than mine for toys. It's not even going to be close. Now, what we learned also at the time was that Spielberg and Lucas traded pieces of their movies to each other. So Steven Spielberg had no reluctance to have us do George's movie because he was going to get a piece of the action. And we also learned something at the time, that Steven Spielberg did not have any cut of the merchandising rights from Columbia for his movies, whereas Lucas, being really smart, and this had not been done before to our knowledge, had retained all the merchandising rights from Fox for himself. He could cut his own deal. So we leave the meeting with Spielberg, and we drive over to Century Plaza Hotel where we were staying to meet with George Lucas and his team. Now, we didn't know that Lucas had no other options at that point. We figured we were in a competition, and at this point, we didn't have any other options because Steven Spielberg had already told us we should do George's movie. So we went in to have a meeting with George and his team, and we quickly struck the deal that is in the Engineering an Empire book for a very modest advance, which is what you pay to gain the rights, so like $25,000. Then a guarantee, which means this is the amount of money you agree to pay the licensor over the first year period, which is $125,000, and a 5% royalty rate, which was the going rate. Now, back in '77, that was real money, and we'd spent that kind of real money on Invisible Man and Man from Atlantis that we'd lost it all on. But we went ahead and made the deal. Part of the negotiation with him was we were very interested in prolonging the life of this property. And George assured us that he had 8 more movies in his head that he was going to make. And on that basis of having the hope, it was a new hope, that he would be able to do that and we'd sustain this, we made the deal. And we came back to Cincinnati, and Dave and his team got to work, and I'll quit talking now. The rest is history.
Oh, that was great.
Open for any questions.
Hey, Craig, Justin Haney here. On behalf of the club, the Georgia Alliance, I just want to thank you for taking the time with us today. I do have a couple questions for you and for the guys, if you have a minute here.
Sure.
We'll start out. Craig, you touched on this, but you seem to be pretty close friends with Bernie Loomis. What made him tick? What got him going?
Well, in my career, there are probably anybody's career, maybe half a dozen guys, 5 guys that'll stand out that you really remember that made a difference in your career or made a difference in you. And Bernie's one of those guys for me. He was larger than life. He was a big guy, larger than life, boisterous, I would say fearless, very intuitive and instinctive, could be abrasive, demanding, expected performance and results. He had a really good product sense. He was really a riverboat gambler, but he wasn't he was a very intelligent riverboat gambler, because that's the way the toy business and really the entertainment business works. You got to make a lot of bets, smart bets, and figure you're only going to hit on a few of them. So he was a terrific guy. If the thing that he believed in that drove the company was the product is king. So there was no politics, no anything that got in the way at Kenner of the product. It was the product and the kids that were going to buy it, or the moms were going to buy it for the kids, that drove everything we did every single day. And Bernie was also, as mentioned in the book, an average tennis player along with me. We were tennis partners. But really a remarkable guy.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for answering that one. You started to talk about it. I was wondering if you could expand on what happened while or when you were there when the contract was signed with Lucasfilm.
Well, part of my job as VP of Marketing was to negotiate all these contracts, and I worked with our in-house counsel, Jim Kipling, to make sure that they were appropriate, and then facilitated them. And once we had the three parts of the deal agreed to with George and the Century Plaza that I mentioned on a handshake deal, then Jim and I put those into our contract that we sent to Lucas for execution. And it's interesting because about this time, the early rumors of Star Wars being a big deal were starting to hit, and there was increasing interest in having that contract signed right away. So I FedExed the contract out to Lucas's office, and Gary Kurtz signed it on his behalf, who was the executive producer of the show, and sent it back to me. And when I got that, I took it right into to Bernie's office to show him that we've got the deal now. So now it's up to us to execute the deal. But there was no haggling, no negotiation, because the three basic parts of the deal were there that I mentioned earlier, and we were banking on sequels, although they didn't commit to any sequels at the time. I also might mention that Kenner was owned by General Mills at that time, which is a big company. That's where I started working before I transferred to Kenner. And Kenner was a very small part of General Mills at the time. General Mills stock went up $2 or $3 the day it was announced that Kenner had gotten intergalactic rights to Star Wars sequels forever. That affected the General Mills stock disproportionately to reality, but that's how much hype was going on in May of that year when the movie just came out.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those
My
stories. And thank you to our book guys, to Matt, Gary, and Steven. You guys putting all this stuff down in book form, for all of us to enjoy. I do have one question that I kind of would like to propose to all three of you. We'll start with Matt, then we can go to Gary, and then Steven. You guys did extensive research in your book. Is there any aspect of the toy process that you now have a new appreciation for?
That's a great question. Everything kind of starts out with preliminary design, right? They come up with the ideas, and marketing comes to the table with some opportunities within the market for a need for a certain kind of toy, and the engineers are ready to execute the general plan, but everything usually kind of falls back to what the accountants say and what they're allowed to put into a toy. So almost everyone we talk to from the kind of the design side and engineering side, we're always kind of of what the accountants would let them do. So I didn't really think about it kind of too much before we started talking to the folks, but the amount of power that the bean counters had on Kenner was quite profound. Like I remember like Boba Fett was kind of the first figure that got an additional paint app, and it was an extra 1 penny, and that was like a huge win for the design team. They got to spend an extra 1 cent on a figure, and so that's why Boba Fett looks so much better and different than the figures that had come before it. Like that, the kind of the second release figure, they got the colors into the line by molding or shooting the figures in different colors of paint, different colors of plastic, I should say. But now with Boba Fett, they got to add some extra paint, and the fact that the bean counters had such a big say on the overall line was something that I didn't really take into consideration before we did the book. But I know that like the sculptors and the people in the shop, the model shop, and those are like the true artists that I think are, in my opinion, that's my favorite part of the book, and I'm sure Gary and Stephen would share that sentiment. We got to include a lot of the photos of their work, the original sculpts and the wood patterns that those guys did in the book, and you get a whole new appreciation for the art of toy making as a result of talking to these folks, and you can see it come through in three-dimensional form in the book. And I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of in the book. And if you want to add anything to that? Do we lose Gary?
Yeah, so I'll agree. Now I'm sorry, guys. I had a little bit of a delay. So yeah, I'll reiterate kind of what Matt said. Going into this, you kind of have an idea that there's going to be toy sculptors and there's going to be model makers and there's going to be design people and artists. It wasn't until honestly until I spoke with Craig that I realized how much went into just acquiring the license. You have to get to that point where you can start sculpting and start making models and start doing drawings and those types of things, designing toys, acquiring that license. And the story, it's one of my favorite stories that we've heard throughout this whole process of doing the book and learning about Kenner history was that little kid in Cincinnati doesn't even know who he is, who was playing with a robot one day at school while Craig was watching. And if we could ever track that kid down and tell him how he changed the course of toy history, it'd be pretty cool. But knowing what just went into even getting to the point where you could start making toys was pretty fascinating to me, and I had a new appreciation for that.
Yeah, I'll co-sign on the sculptors. Not to take away from all the work that all the other disciplines did within the organization, but as somebody who has a sculpting background, I was fascinated with the way that these guys would work in wax, because that's a very different medium than sculpting in clay or other materials. And then you obviously had contract guys like Bill Lemon who were sculpting out of acetate, who were pioneers in that, which is a reductive as opposed to an additive sculpting medium. And the thing that I found so interesting about that was that there was a really big push behind the scenes shortly before Kenner got the Star Wars license to have more sculptors that weren't so much just industrial artists, but folks with a fine arts background. And that was a big change that, that Francis Barnum had kind of started when he was sculpting director, and then one that John Gardner kept adding to with folks that he had in house during the initial Star Wars period, and then the contract folks that he was using a lot out in California. Everybody had a fine arts background, and it wasn't just industrial artists, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think that had a big effect on how the overall figures of the line looked.
Well, guys, I really appreciate it. Just one more time on behalf of the club, I thank all of you for your time today. And hopefully you guys can stick around. We've got a lot of great programming for the rest of the day and throughout the weekend. And again, just thank you so much.